Forest fires threaten the environmental security of Europe, specifically EU member states of the Mediterranean. The EU has adopted strategies to prevent and mitigate forest fires via the EU Forest Strategy for 2030 and to restore forests through the Nature Restoration Regulation. However, amendments are necessary to ensure that not only is biodiversity restored, but victims of forest fires left with psychological damage and in need of financial assistance have a legally binding claim to the support that they are in need of.
What do you think when you think about security? Maybe this comes to mind? Or also maybe this comes to mind? But the environment? Well, the environment usually stays far from the topic of security. However, if we think about it this way, it might bring us a bit closer to the idea of why these two things are related. In the EU, climate change has been increasingly present in discussions of security and has been even framed as a threat multiplier that tends to escalate and aggravate already existing threats. Luckily, the EU is not indifferent to such issues and most of all cares about the environment and about its citizens. But when the European Environmental Agency released its first climate risk assessment, it clearly stated that Europe is not prepared, not for food insecurity, not for energy disruptions, and certainly not for the psychological and social toll of climate disasters. The EU has ambitious environmental policies. The Green Deal, the Nature Restoration Regulation, these are designed to heal damaged ecosystems. But while the Union positions itself as a global climate security leader, the human side of this crisis is missing from its own legislation. Wildfires, for example, are incredibly concerning, especially for those living in the Mediterranean region. And they are very destructive. The fires don't select who to affect, who has the capacity to pay back or not restorations and reconstruction, who lives on one side of the border or on the other side. It is indeed an issue that sees no boundaries, no differences, and no borders between member states. And this is why we are arguing for the amendment of the NRR, to make restoring nature inseparable from restoring people, to give wildfire victims financial and psychological support under the EU's environmental framework.
Every year, over 60,000 wildfires occur across the European Union, burning an average of 500,000 hectares, twice the size of Luxembourg. These fires can cause around $2 billion in economic losses annually and lead to human casualties. With climate change accelerating, the threat is only growing, particularly in Southern Europe, where countries like Portugal, Spain, Italy, Greece, and France account for 85% of all burned land. If global warming increases by 3 degrees Celsius, an estimated 15 million more people will face high to extreme fire danger for over 10 days each year. Damages are expected to double, and Mediterranean economies could face losses of up to 10% of their maximum yearly output. The financial impact doesn't end there. Fires destroy homes, especially in the wildland-urban interface, as seen in Portugal in 2017 and Greece in 2021. Insurance costs are rising, and infrastructure like roads and power lines are frequently damaged. Agricultural regions also suffer greatly. Mediterranean countries saw 3 billion euros in agriculture and forestry losses in 2022 alone. Beyond economic costs, wildfires are devastating to biodiversity. In 2022, 43% of the total burned area in the EU occurred in Natura 2000 protected zones, harming fragile ecosystems. Fires fragment habitats, disrupt animal migration and reproduction, and destroy mature forests that store carbon, further fueling climate change. One case from Spain's Doñana National Park estimated a biodiversity loss worth up to 296,000 euros due to damage to the endangered Iberian lynx's habitat. Fighting these fires is also costly. The EU has expanded its rescue firefighting fleet, but these emergency responses add to the financial burden. Long-term estimates suggest countries like Portugal, Spain, and Greece could each face hundreds of millions in wildfire damages over the next decades. In short, wildfires are not just natural disasters. They're environmental, social, and economic crises that Europe must urgently address.
Wildfires have swept across Mediterranean regions, from Italy to Algeria and Tunisia, leading to civilian deaths and mass evacuations. In 2021 alone, over 10,000 people died during the wildfire season, and many more suffered fire-related injuries, such as burns and respiratory problems. According to the Joint Research Center, about 120,000 people in Greece, Italy, Algeria, and Tunisia were directly affected, though this excludes those indirectly impacted, such as people exposed to smoke or forced evacuation. Media coverage helps reveal this broader toll, reporting health effects, forced displacement, and long-term disruption. Beyond the physical impacts, wildfire also cause serious mental health damage. Climate-related disasters often trigger emotional distress and lasting mental health issues. Ecological grief is a term that conveys the emotional suffering that arises from the loss of ecosystems and environments that people depend on and identify with. This grief can stem from the loss of natural environments, the disruption of ecological knowledge and cultural identity, and even from the anticipation of future ecological losses. Recent research are now broadening the way environmental loss is assessed, moving beyond the economic measures of damage to include the psychological impacts of affected people. Because ecological grief represents a measurable mental health damage directly correlated to ecological loss, this paper's legislative proposal calls for embedding human recovering from ecological loss caused by wildfires and other climate-related disasters as a subcomponent of environmental restoration policies.
With the increase in severity and frequency of forest fires and other natural disasters, the EU has laid down a series of strategies, guidelines, and proposals aimed towards preventing and mitigating wildfires. For example, the EU Forest Strategy 2030. Expert groups on forest fires have been established, and EU-wide monitoring and emergency response systems have been put into place. With the Nature Restoration Regulation, they have implemented a regulation that addresses damage caused by disasters and is as such intended to reduce the vulnerability of forests through restoration. We are proposing an amendment of this regulation to include not just the restoring of biodiversity, but also ensuring the recovery of victims. Our amendments are the following. In Article 1, the subject matter, a point E shall be added, ensuring recovery of victims and of natural disasters. To Article 3, the definitions of environmental emergency, environmental grief, and victims shall be added. To Chapter 2 of the regulation, the restoration targets and obligations, amendments shall be made as well. Those amendments center around financial and psychological recovery. Financial recovery shall include member states financially supporting citizens experiencing loss of property or jobs as a result of natural disasters. This shall be supported by the EU Solidarity Fund. Psychological recovery means that in the case of environmental emergencies, psychologists shall be allowed to provide their services also cross-border for victim support, even if diplomas do not match standards of other countries. The aim of our amendment is to encapsulate and combat the wider effects of wildfires in the European Union, namely psychological trauma and damage to victims of natural disasters like wildfires. In doing so, it is ensured that all affected victims can recover through financial and psychological support. We also shortly address the different stakeholders, which are the following. 1. To realize the amendment, the support of the Commission, Council, and Parliament are required. In the long term, the European Commission, which oversees the EU Solidarity Fund, will also be an essential stakeholder. In monitoring and implementing the amendment, national governments are also of vital importance.
But on what legal basis do we propose the amendment? Well, Article 191.1 out of the treaty says that the Union policies shall contribute to protecting human health. Article 161.1 further supports that because it says that a high level of human health protection shall be ensured in the definition and implementation of all Union policies and activities. Okay, chill, easy, that is the legal basis. Well, not quite. Article 192 out of the treaties and 168.7 say that the EU is only allowed to propose legislative acts in certain areas, and victim support is technically not quite part of it. However, as we have laid down, it is important that we view human recovery as tied to ecological recovery. They are interconnected, and it is essential that there is cross-border EU-wide regulation. Therefore, we are making use of Article 352. Article 352 in the treaty says that if the EU is not given the necessary power to propose certain acts, then this article can give them the necessary legal grounds to do so. Council and Parliament, however, need to vote in favor of this. Only if they agree, the Commission is then allowed to propose an amendment regarding human recovery. Mala mentioned that our proposal will include both financial and psychological support. The legal grounds to propose financial support is Article 153.1. Here it is said that if workers are excluded from the labor market, which they might be if there is the case of a climate disaster, the Union shall support member states in their activities. We propose that the financial support should come partially from the EU Solidarity Fund, which has been established for, well, exactly these reasons or these cases. For psychological support, we are using Article 168.2 in the treaties as a legal basis. Here, member states are encouraged to improve the complementarity of their health services in cross-border areas. With our proposal, EU member states shall be legally bound to provide psychological victim support and aim to establish cross-border psychological support systems.
Climate change has increased the number of wildfires in Europe, particularly in the Mediterranean region, for EU member states and their neighbors, which is a security concern for them because of three major reasons being damaging the citizens, which they're trying to protect, economic concerns with rebuilding and the physical damage that it does, as well as the environment destroying important land and resources and other species that live within them. As it is difficult to combat wildfires before and prevent them before they happen, we would suggest that we would add amendments to the Regulation EU 2024-1991 of the European Parliament and the Council of 24th of June 2024 on nature restoration and amending a Regulation EU 2022-869. And doing this is just focusing more on the victim support and the aftermath of these events. For victim support, we are amending sections of Article 1, Article 3, and Chapter 2 in order to address aid to, as previously mentioned, aid to those affected, and also including psychological damage to the definitions and funding and aid for these people.